It was Christmas Eve, and Santa, as usual, was extremely busy at his works. But this year he was especially busy, if you know what I mean, because at every house he visited, a special Christmas tree was to be given away. Santa was humming away to himself as he prepared the delivery list of presents for his staff to use when they loaded the sleigh. He made a careful note of some houses which should be treated very carefully because of vicious Rottweiler dogs which slept around the hearth, and the other, more friendly houses, where mince pies and glasses of sherry would be waiting. All in all, it was a very, very hectic time. There was a knock on Santa's door, and he called out cheerfully, "Ho, ho, ho! Come on in, and a Merry Christmas to you!" It was Mr. Arthur Spindle, the chief engineer, whom Santa trusted with everything except money. "A Merry Christmas, my arse," he said, treading his cigarette out on Santa's nice red carpet as he came in. "And that's what you'll be saying when you hear what I've got to tell you?" "I doubt it, Mr. Spindle," replied Santa, shaking his head. "I very much doubt that I would say something like that. How can you be in such a miserable frame of mind on Christmas Eve?"
"The boys from the ministry have just stopped the sleigh on a test run and grounded it," Mr. Spindle explained, "and we can't do nothing to get it back on the road tonight."
Oh dear, breathed Santa, going nearly as white as his beard. "What on earth is the matter with it?"
"Fog lamps, Santa, fog lamps," he replied.
"What about fog lamps, Mr. Spindle?" gasped Santa, still recovering from the shock of having no sleigh. Mr. Spindle told Santa how the Department of Transport examiners had found that one of the fog lamps on the sleigh wasn't working, and that they had declared the sleigh unroadworthy as a result. Santa walked around his office for a while, stroking his long white beard and scratching his head under his big red cap, wondering what on earth could be done. It was the busiest night of the year. To say that Santa was very concerned about the matter would be to put it mildly. Here they all were, nearly ready to get things moving, but without a sleigh. After some while, Santa asked the very reasonable question, "Why wasn't the sleigh checked before it went out, Mr. Spindle?"
"I dunno,"
he replied, lighting up another cigarette.
"It's nobody's job, really."
"It must have been somebody's job," exclaimed Santa angrily, momentarily forgetting his good manners. "And why wasn't the matter picked up at the last MOT inspection?" Mr. Spindle blew a cloud of smoke down his nostrils and into the room, and then said rather gloomily,
"The near side lamp didn't work on test as it happens. But as it was summer and the law doesn't say you has to have fog lamps, we whipped 'em off so as to get a new ticket."
"Are you saying that it is only one lamp which doesn't work?" asked Santa with some excitement in his voice.
"That's right, me old cocker,"
nodded Mr. Spindle. "Then why can't we go out with only one lamp? I worked for years with the aid of the dim light from a single reindeer's nose." Mr. Spindle shook his head slowly and then said,
"It don't work like that, Santa. A red conch on a reindeer is one thing, but when you come to talk about fog lamps on a sleigh, you can't have one on its own. The law says that you has to have a pair, and both of them has to work." Suddenly Santa looked at Mr. Spindle and said, "Couldn't we get a new fog lamp out of the stores and fit it?" "'Fraid not," he replied. "The lads in the stores pissed off up the pub hours ago. It's Christmas Eve, you see, Santa."
Santa felt very dejected indeed, and at the same time extremely worried. How was he going to get all of the presents delivered on time to all those children, who he knew would be trying to keep awake to see him? "I know," he said. "I'll phone my old friend, the Queen of all the Fairies. I bet she could lend me a hand with a few little people to help with the deliveries."
"She'll charge you the earth, Santa,"
grunted Mr. Spindle, puffing at yet another cigarette. "Well, I'll just have to foot the bill and offset it against next year's budget somehow," came Santa's quick reply. Mr. Spindle was obviously less than happy with this solution to the problem, because he knew that the men in Santa's workshops were very organised people, and always liked to be consulted when important decisions had to be taken. On this occasion, though, he could see that Santa was determined to get things moving quickly, and so he thought to himself that he would just have to wait and see what would happen. He left the office and went away to the works canteen, where the serving lady was on 5 hours overtime to cover for the emergency. Back in his office, Santa picked up his phone and dialed the secret number for the Queen of all the Fairies. After a few seconds ringing, a taped message told him that the number had been changed, and that he should put a 2 in front of the old number. Santa redialed the new number and was most annoyed to find that the line was engaged.
"Bother," he thought out loud. "Whenever you need someone in a hurry, the number is always engaged."
He paced around the room for quite a while, constantly trying the Queen's secret number, until quite suddenly he heard the ringing tone. The phone at the other end was answered by an old man who said, "Hello, who's that?" Santa was quite surprised by this, as he thought that the Queen lived all alone like himself. But then, after a little conversation which ran like this,
"Hello, this is Santa Claus here. Don't give me a load of old bollocks. Who's speaking?" "I tell you this is Santa Claus, my good fellow." "Iris, I've got some silly bastard on the phone says he's Santa Claus." "All right, I'll tell him. She says to piss off and stop playing silly buggers."
Santa realised that he'd been connected to a wrong number, so he redialed, and after a grand total of nearly 30 minutes, he finally spoke to the Queen of all the Fairies.
"Hello, Santa," she said happily, "and Merry Christmas to you and all your staff."
Santa didn't feel too much like saying Merry Christmas, but nonetheless he did, and then explained the whole of the miserable problem to her, and how much he needed her help. She was most sympathetic, but told him,
"All my fairies are out busily granting 3 wishes and taking away old rotten teeth and leaving nice shiny 50-pence pieces in their place. I can't possibly help."
"But you must," pleaded Santa. "All those nice little children are depending on it."
"Well, I might be able to find a few on overtime and rest day working, Santa," she said. "But who's going to foot the bill?"
Seeing that he wasn't going to get anything done any other way, Santa reluctantly agreed to accept an invoice for the labour charge, and gave the Fairy Queen an official order number to quote, and asked her to keep the VAT separate so that he could claim it back in the normal way.
"Righty-ho," she said. "I'll have some fairies over there as soon as possible."
The phone call was no sooner over than in walked Mr. Spindle, accompanied by another man, whose eyes were pointing in at least 2 different directions at the same time, and who wore a blue overall-type coat, a flat cap, and had a hand-rolled cigarette sticking out of the corner of his mouth.
"Who's this?"
asked Santa.
"George Mallet," replied Mr. Spindle. "He's the works representative, and wants to talk about all these poxy little fairies what have just turned up and what are working like maniacs."
"Are they here already?" queried Santa, somewhat surprised.
"They are,"
croaked Mr. Mallet, with one eye on Santa and the other looking at the wall.
"And the lads is very bitter about the rumour that they're on rest day and overtime rates for doing our jobs."
"Well, I had to do something," protested Santa, "or the presents won't get delivered."
"There's a proper negotiating procedure to go through before you can take on casual labour,"
groaned Mr. Mallet, and as he spoke his cigarette seemed to go in and out of his mouth.
"I'll take whatever management decisions are necessary to achieve our goals," fumed Santa. "It's because of your brothers in engineering that I've had to go to all this bloody trouble."
"How long do you reckon that these shit-pot little fairies are here for, then?" asked Mr. Mallet.
"Till all the effing work's done,"
shouted Santa authoritatively, and surprising everyone with his command of basic English.
"In that case, we're in dispute with management, and we'll have to talk about a withdrawal of our labour," moaned Mr. Mallet in a serious tone. "You mean to say that you would call a sodding strike on Christmas Eve?" cried Santa. "Too true, Harry," bawled Mr. Mallet, with his eyes looking away from each other. "We has to look after our brothers, don't we, Arthur?"
Mr. Spindle nodded in agreement.
"You bastards!"
yelled Santa, who, as you can imagine, had really got the arsehole by now.
"I'm pissed off with the whole bloody lot of you, and Christmas as well, for that matter."
Santa felt his temper coming to the boil, and with the dexterity which some youths would be proud to display, he pinned Mr. Mallet to the wall and punched the dirty little cigarette end right down his throat, and then, for good measure, gave him a big knee in the ghoulies, which sent him reeling round the office, spitting blood, teeth, and cigarette ends, and not knowing which part of his body to nurse first. Leaving Mr. Mallet to recover, he turned on Mr. Spindle. Grabbing him by the neck, he landed a good left hook to the chin and hissed,
"That's for dogging your fag ends out of my carpet, and this one's for—"
But just as Santa was going to land a second punch to let Mr. Spindle know, firstly, how he felt, and secondly, how things were going to be next year, a pretty little fairy came into the office and lisped, "There's one Christmas tree over Santa. What shall I do with it?" And that is why there is always a fairy on top of the Christmas tree.